Imagine a region of about 372 million people.
Right. Which is already huge.
Yeah, exactly. Now, picture that population nearly doubling by the year 2050.
It's just an astonishing rate of growth.
It really is. And with that kind of demographic explosion comes this absolutely massive, like almost insatiable demand for energy, to power homes, industries, transportation networks.
Oh, absolutely. The infrastructure strain is incredible.
Right. So here is the mind-bending premise I really want you to consider today. What if this entire region decided to just completely ditch fossil fuels?
Just entirely.
Entirely. And what if they did it not just to save the planet, but because it is fundamentally mathematically cheaper, like vastly more reliable than sticking with oil and gas?
I mean, it sounds like an absolute utopian fantasy when you frame it that way.
Right.
Because usually when we hear about transitioning away from fossil fuels,
Yeah.
the underlying assumption, the unspoken narrative, really is that it's going to be this painful, expensive sacrifice.
Yeah, that developing nations simply can't afford.
Yeah.
That is the narrative we're up against. But today, we are looking at hard data that points in the exact opposite direction. We're doing a deep dive into a really fascinating piece of research. It's formally titled Energy Industry System Transition Options for the Eastern Africa Power Pool.
It's quite a title, but it's a groundbreaking piece of work.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive is to unpack this first-of-its-kind multi-sector analysis. We want to understand exactly how 11 Eastern African countries can literally leapfrog traditional fossil fuel industrialization.
Right, you just skip that whole phase.
Exactly, and build a 100% renewable, climate-resilient future by 2050. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Well, the foundation laid out in this study is incredibly thorough. To really grasp what's at stake here, you have to understand the current landscape of the Eastern Africa Power Pool.
Or the EAPP, right?
Right, the EAPP. We were talking about a really diverse block of 11 countries.
Yeah.
It spans from Sudan in the north, down through Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, all the way to Tanzania.
It's a massive geographic area.
Huge.
Yeah.
And right now, these countries are trapped in this extreme energy paradox.
Yeah, I was looking at that paradox in the data, and it is a logistical nightmare for the people actually living there. It seems like the energy system is fractured in like 3 completely different, totally unsustainable directions.
Exactly. Break that down a bit.
Well, first you have the domestic reality, how people actually cook their food. Millions are still relying heavily on biomass, so meaning wood and charcoal.
Which is incredibly inefficient.
But not just inefficient, it drives massive deforestation.
Yeah.
And it causes really severe respiratory issues from indoor air pollution.
Right. It's a huge public health crisis.
Yeah. Then you step outside, you look at the transport sector, moving goods and people, and it is almost entirely dependent on imported fossil fuels.
Almost 100%.
Yeah. And finally, you look at the electrical grid itself, and the dominant source of renewable energy for a lot of these nations is just large-scale hydropower.
You've painted the picture perfectly. And, on paper, a grid powered by hydropower sounds fantastic.
Sure, it's clean.
Right. It's renewable, it generates a massive amount of baseload electricity, and it doesn't emit carbon. But this study points out a really glaring structural flaw in relying on it so heavily.
The climate itself.
The vulnerability is climate change.
Because hydropower relies entirely on predictable, consistent rainfall and river flows. And if there's one thing Eastern Africa has struggled with over the last, 2 decades, it's predictability.
Absolutely. The region has become increasingly prone to severe, prolonged droughts.
Yeah.
The study specifically highlights these devastating dry spells in 2011 and then a massive multi-year drought stretching from 2020 all the way to 2024.
Wow.
And the mechanics of this failure are just brutal in their simplicity. When the rains fail, the river levels drop, the reservoirs dry up, and the dams physically cannot spin their turbines.
So the grid is essentially crippled.
Completely crippled.
So if I'm tracking the logic here, relying on hydropower in a water-stressed, increasingly drought-prone region is basically like investing your entire retirement fund in umbrella sales in the desert.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. Yes.
Right. Like, it might look good on a spreadsheet if you assume historical weather patterns, but it is incredibly risky today. When the weather doesn't cooperate, your entire economic engine just shuts down.
Yeah, you are building the foundation of your industrial economy on a resource that is literally evaporating.
Wow, that's a bleak way to put it, but yeah.
It's the reality. And the consequences of these frailties in the energy system are severe. But the water vulnerability is actually only half the crisis.
Right, because the other half seems to be the crushing financial weight of the fossil fuels they're importing, just to run their trucks and cars.
Exactly.
There's this fascinating detail from this study that I wanted to bring up. Ethiopia made global history in January of 2024 by completely banning the import of fossil-fueled vehicles.
It was a massive move.
Yeah, and reading between the lines, they didn't just wake up one day and decide to be environmental pioneers. They made that move because importing fossil fuels was financially bleeding the country dry. Right.
That is the pivotal realization here, yeah. And it perfectly illustrates the central thesis of this study. The Ethiopian Ministry of Transport and Logistics enacted that ban because the macroeconomics of importing oil had just become entirely unsustainable.
The numbers are wild.
They are. To give you some context on the scale of this financial drain, between 2015 and 2020, two-thirds of Africa's total energy expenditure went simply to buying fuels from outside the continent.
I mean, two-thirds of their energy budget is just leaving the region.
Just gone.
You cannot build a thriving, industrializing economy when your national wealth is constantly hemorrhaging just to keep the lights on and the supply chains moving.
You can't. It is a massive wealth transfer out of the region. So the researchers behind this study realized something fundamental. If your problem is that you are bleeding cash importing fuel and your grid shuts down when it stops raining, you can't just build a few solar panels to power some light bulbs and call it a day.
Right, that's a Band-Aid.
Exactly. You have to systematically replace the fuel itself.
Which means rethinking the entire economy from the ground up, not just the electrical grid.
Yes, precisely.
And that leads us to how this study models the solution. Knowing that it's cheaper on average for the region is great, but you can't just isolate electricity. Like, people still need extreme heat for industrial processes, fuel for cargo ships, clean drinking water.
And that is exactly where previous research often fell short. Historically, energy transition studies suffered from tunnel vision. They really only looked at power generation.
Oh, interesting. Just the grid.
Just the grid. But this study uses a highly sophisticated tool called the LUT Energy System Transition Model, or LUT-ESTM.
Yeah, I read up on this model, and it is fascinating. It's an hourly resolved optimization model.
Right, which means it's incredibly detailed.
Yeah, so it's not just looking at annual averages. It is simulating the energy needs of these 11 countries for every single hour of the year for 30 years.
Hour by hour.
Factoring in weather patterns, demand spikes at night, seasonal changes, all of it.
It does all of that. And more importantly, it integrates everything. It treats the power sector, heating and cooling, transportation, heavy industry, and even water desalination as one single interconnected organism.
Wow.
This is a concept that study refers to as sector coupling.
Sector coupling. It sounds a bit like corporate jargon, honestly.
It does, yeah.
But from what I gather, it basically means tearing down the invisible walls between different parts of the economy. Like, instead of the electricity grid being its own silo and the transportation sector being its own separate silo, they share energy seamlessly.
That is the exact mechanism. You physically and digitally link them. But sector coupling introduces a massive practical challenge.
Right.
Because it's easy to electrify a passenger car with a lithium-ion battery. But how do you electrify heavy industry?
Well, that is the exact question you might be pondering if you're listening to this. You can't just plug a massive steel mill or like a Boeing 747 or a giant cargo ship into a wall socket.
Right, you absolutely cannot.
The batteries would be way too heavy, and they don't produce the intense concentrated heat required for industrial manufacturing.
No, they don't. And this study addresses that hurdle directly through a technology known as Power-to-X, or PTX.
Okay, PTX.
This is where the chemistry gets incredibly exciting. You have to remember that Eastern Africa has some of the most potent, consistent solar and wind resources on the planet.
Just massive potential.
Exactly. So in the transition modeled here, they build massive amounts of solar and wind farms. And during the day, when the sun is blazing, these farms produce vastly more electricity than the electrical grid actually needs.
So you have all this excess, virtually free energy.
Yeah.
And obviously you can't store all of it in traditional batteries. So you use that excess renewable electricity to power a machine called an electrolyzer. And an electrolyzer, at its core, basically uses an electrical current to zap water molecules. Like, it breaks the chemical bonds to split the water into oxygen and green hydrogen.
You get the first step down perfectly. Now, hydrogen is a fantastic energy carrier. but it is notoriously difficult to store and transport safely.
Yeah, it's super volatile.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the process takes that green hydrogen and synthesizes it. By combining the hydrogen with carbon captured from the air or industrial flues or nitrogen from the atmosphere, they create what we call e-fuels and e-chemicals.
Well, like synthetic regions of what we use now.
Yes. We are talking about synthesizing e-ammonia, e-methanol, and synthetic jet fuels.
Let's just pause on the mechanics of that for a second, because it is wild.
It really is.
We are not just making hydrogen, we are building hydrocarbon chains from scratch. We are capturing carbon, forcing it to bond with hydrogen using solar power, and creating liquid fuels. It is essentially an energy time machine. You are capturing today's sunshine, converting it into a liquid fuel, and storing it to burn a month later in a jet engine without ever having to pull a drop of petroleum out of the ground.
An energy time machine is a brilliant metaphor for it. You are literally manufacturing synthetic liquid fuels out of thin air, water, and sunshine.
It's just crazy to think about.
It is. And those e-fuels are what you use to run the steel mills, produce fertilizers, and fly the planes. And this isn't just a niche side project for a few airplanes either.
No.
No. This study projects that by 2050, the chemical industry alone will account for 50.5% of total industrial energy use in this region.
Wait, half of all industrial energy?
Yes, half.
Just for chemicals. Because they will need a staggering amount of these e-chemicals, not just to burn as fuel, but to use as foundational feedstocks.
Right.
To manufacture plastics, fertilizers, building materials, things that are currently derived entirely from petroleum.
Exactly. And because of the region's incredible solar resources, this model outlines the birth of what this study calls a solar-to-X economy.
A solar-to-X economy?
Yeah.
Yep.
The sun doesn't just provide electricity for lights anymore. It provides the fundamental chemical building blocks for all heavy industry and manufacturing.
Okay, I'm looking at this and thinking, a high-tech solar-to-X economy sounds like a trillion-dollar sci-fi dream.
Sure.
And we are talking about developing nations. If I am a policymaker in one of these countries, I am terrified of the price tag. Building millions of solar panels, wind turbines, and giant hydrogen electrolyzer plants from scratch. I mean, it must be financially ruinous, surely.
Well, that is the assumption most people make, and it is exactly where the data from this study provides its most shocking insight.
Okay, hit me.
The researchers modeled several different transition pathways out to 2050. They looked at a current policy scenario, or CPS, which is essentially business as usual, sticking to fossil fuels and traditional grid expansion.
Right.
Then they looked at a delayed policy scenario. And then they modeled the best policy scenarios, or BPS.
And the PPS is the really ambitious one.
Right. Highly ambitious pathways aiming for 100% renewable energy, total sector coupling, and a complete phase-out of fossil fuels.
Okay, and what did the data show? Because I'm assuming building this sci-fi utopia is astronomically expensive.
Actually, the data shows that the highly ambitious 100% renewable pathways are cheaper than sticking to the current fossil-heavy policies.
Wait, really? Cheaper?
Yes, cheaper. The math is incredibly stark. The least cost renewable pathway, the best policy scenario, will cost between 104 and 116 billion euros annually by 2050.
Okay.
Compare that to the current policy scenario, the fossil fuel heavy route, which will cost 124 billion euros annually.
Oh, wow.
Going 100% renewable is billions of euros cheaper every single year, and it achieves 73 to 74% lower carbon emissions.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here.
Go for it.
If you are listening to those numbers, your alarm bells are probably ringing. Building new infrastructure requires laying down massive amounts of capital before a single light bulb turns on. If the upfront costs are so astronomical, how can the annual cost by 2050 possibly be lower?
It comes down to the fundamental mechanical difference between how a renewable economy operates versus a fossil fuel economy. It is the difference between CapEx, which is capital expenditure, and OpEx, which is operational expenditure.
Oh, okay. Meaning CapEx is the painful upfront cost of building the machine, like the solar farm, the electrolyzer, the wind turbine.
Exactly.
And OpEx is what it costs to run it every day. With a coal or gas plant, you build the plant, but then you are trapped paying massive OpEx because you have to keep buying the fuel, shipping the fuel, and burning the fuel every single day, basically forever.
Precisely. In a renewable system, the CapEx is indeed very high, but once you build it, the sunshine is free. The wind is free. So the OpEx plummets to near zero. By transitioning to a solar-to-X economy, These countries completely eliminate the crushing, volatile costs of importing fossil fuels.
That makes total sense. They shift their entire economy away from being at the mercy of global oil price spikes.
Exactly. And instead, they put their money into stable domestic infrastructure.
Yeah.
You're paying for the machine, not the fuel. Over a 30-year timeline, that shift saves the region billions.
But, averages hide the realities on the ground, though. A
Mhm.
regional saving of billions is great on a macro level, but a windy coastal nation is dealing with a very different geography than a landlocked mountain range.
Oh, absolutely.
So how does this massive transition actually map out across 11 vastly different nations?
Well, the genius of the LUTESTM model is that it doesn't treat the region as a monolith.
Okay.
It breaks the transition down country by country, treating each as an independent electrical node.
And the sheer scale of the energy generation required by 2050 is staggering.
That's staggering. The study projects the region will need to generate 300 and 485 terawatt hours of electricity.
Wow. For context, if you're listening, a single terawatt hour can power roughly 100,000 homes for a year. So we are talking about the equivalent of powering hundreds of millions of homes, plus a massive, heavily industrialized manufacturing sector.
Exactly. It is an astronomical amount of power.
Yeah, and because the geography varies so much, the cost of generating that electricity must vary wildly between the countries, right?
It does. We measure this using a metric called the levelized cost of electricity, or LCOE. It is essentially the average cost of generating a megawatt hour of electricity over the entire lifetime of a power plant.
Okay.
According to this study, the regional average LCOE will be an incredibly cheap 22 euros per megawatt hour.
That is cheap,
Okay.
but the internal disparities are fascinating. Like, because of its incredible unshaded solar resources and high coastal wind speeds, Somalia will actually have the cheapest electricity in the entire region at just 16 euros per megawatt hour.
Right.
Meanwhile, landlocked Uganda, which has, slightly less optimal solar and wind conditions compared to its direct neighbors, will be the most expensive at 28 euros per megawatt hour.
Which really highlights how hyper-localized the engineering solutions need to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it brings us to one of the most critical mechanical challenges of a 100% renewable grid. Storage, yes. When your grid is dominated by variable resources, meaning the sun sets every night and the wind sometimes stops blowing, you need massive amounts of storage to keep the system balanced.
Yeah, you can almost think of energy storage as the shock absorbers for the electrical grid.
Oh, I like that.
Like if a cloud passes over a massive solar farm or the wind dies down, the grid experiences a bump, right? A sudden drop in power. The storage systems, whether they are giant battery parks or thermal storage, absorb that shock, instantly discharging power to smooth out the ride and keep the steel mills running.
Exactly. And those shock absorbers need to be massive. Take Sudan, for instance. According to the model, Sudan will require the highest storage generation in the entire region by 2050, around 99 terawatt hours.
99 terawatt hours just for storage.
Yes. Because Sudan will generate a massive proportion of its electricity from daytime solar, they will require enormous battery parks to soak up that midday sun and discharge it steadily throughout the night to balance their grid frequency and meet industrial demand.
Okay, so synthesizing everything we've covered so far. The technology for sector coupling and power to X exists.
It does.
The math proves that relying on free wind and sun is cheaper in the long run than importing expensive oil.
Yep.
The domestic resources are abundant, but there's a massive catch here, isn't there?
There always is.
If the blueprint is this obvious, is the only thing holding this back just a massive game of financial chicken regarding those upfront CapEx costs?
You've hit the nail on the head. The primary hurdle is the initial investment, and it is a major systemic barrier. Developing these colossal infrastructures requires billions in capital upfront. And historically, the global finance community has severely underserved this specific region. The study points out a pretty stark historical reality.
Which is?
Between 2010 and 2020, over 75% of all renewable energy investments in Africa went to just 4 countries: Egypt, Kenya, Morocco, and South Africa.
Wow. Meaning the rest of the continent, including most of the Eastern Africa power pool, is basically fighting over financial scraps.
Yes. Private investors are often scared off by perceived macroeconomic risks, currency fluctuations, or political instability.
Sure, that makes sense from an investment standpoint.
Right. But for this transition to actually work, Global development finance institutions, places like the World Bank or the IMF, must step in and fundamentally change their approach.
How do they actually do that in practice, though? Like, what does de-risking actually look like?
Well, it means providing specific financial instruments, things like first loss guarantees, concessional loans with very low interest rates, and currency hedging mechanisms.
Got it.
The international institutions need to provide the safety net that absorbs the initial perceived risk. Once you lower the cost of capital, private money will flow in, allowing this cheaper, cleaner infrastructure to be built.
So it is really about changing the global mindset from seeing this as risky charity to seeing it as the most profitable, stable, long-term infrastructure play available.
Exactly.
So pulling all these threads together for you listening, we are looking at a region moving away from drought-vulnerable hydropower and incredibly expensive imported oil, and they're moving toward a highly integrated, multi-sector, solar-driven economy.
Right.
And the biggest takeaway is that this isn't just some environmental wish. It is mathematically, chemically, and technologically the most economically sound blueprint for industrialization in the global south.
It really completely flips the script on how we view development. We no longer have to choose between economic growth and climate action.
Because they're now the exact same pathway.
Yes, exactly.
And if you are trying to understand where global industry is heading in the next few decades, this model proves something vital. It proves that rapid, cost-effective, full-scale decarbonization is structurally possible today.
It is.
The technology is here, the economics work. It is just a matter of deploying the capital to build the machine. So thank you for joining us as we unpacked all of this today. It has been a truly eye-opening look at energy industry system transition options for the Eastern Africa power pool.
It really has. And I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder, actually. Something that builds on the incredible potential of Paradox we talked about.
Oh, please do.
So this study focuses entirely on achieving energy self-sufficiency within these 11 countries, right?
Huh?
But if Eastern Africa successfully harnesses its massive solar potential to create endless synthetic e-fuels and e-chemicals, consider this.
Okay.
How will global geopolitics fundamentally shift when countries that spent the last century financially crippled by the cost of importing fossil fuels suddenly become the world's premier exporters of clean energy?